Hi guys, it's Rob from Royal Balls. We've been waiting for clutch number 4. That's the Pastel Het Lavender to the Firefly Het Lavender clutch to shed out. They've now shed out. So we're going to take a look at that clutch and see what we got. 2 doses of Pastel and 1 dose of Fire in the mix here. And it's a good opportunity to showcase the Fire gene. Fire is an awesome brightening gene. Pattern reducer, and gives a lovely clean look to snakes, which is held on to as the snakes age. So Fire is a readily available and cheap gene that you can add to many combinations to enhance the clean, bright look of the snake, and also keep that bright, clean look into maturity. So let's take a look at the clutch. One of the snakes that hatched out has an issue with its eye. It looks like an infection. The eye is extremely swollen but clear. The fluid inside is completely clear. It's not yellow. There's no pus. So we are monitoring that snake and treating it with an antibactericide. It is a new hatchling, so way too young to be injecting antibiotics, and I'm not completely convinced that it is actually an infection. It just looks like some sort of fluid on the eye. So we'll be monitoring that closely. I will show you the snake just for completeness. Not all plain sailing in this hobby. And if you remember, I did cut this clutch 5 days early. I cut on day 55 after my disastrous clutch 3, the yellow belly het for pied clutch, where we got the dead and deformed babies. I was a little bit worried about my incubator and about the eggs, so I cut this clutch early just to make sure that the babies were okay, and they all were okay, but they did sit in the egg having cut them for 5 days before they eventually emerged. And many people say that cutting eggs does no harm, and in the majority of cases it does not, but as soon as you cut into the egg you do expose the hatchlings in the egg to bacterial infections. They do not get bacterial infections inside the egg. That's only something they get once they are exposed to bacteria when they hatch. And I'm just wondering whether cutting the eggs early actually introduced bacteria into this one snake egg, and consequently we got an eye infection. Can't be 100% certain. I haven't done very well with snakes on eye infections. If you remember, the Desert Ghost male that I imported from the US came with an eye infection, which we sorted out with antibiotics, and that snake is now fine. So I do have some experience with it, but nonetheless I warn you that the snake with the eye problem does have a very swollen eye, and you'll see that in the video. Okay guys, so clutch 4 is now out of the egg. They're all sitting in here. There are 7 snakes in here. One of the lavenders is missing, and we'll get to that in a moment. But let's just have a look and see what we got. You remember that there was Pastel in the mother, and there was Pastel and Fire in the father. So 2 doses of Pastel, Fire in the mix. Normals are possible. Fire is possible. Firefly, Superfly, Pastel and Super Pastel are all possible, as well as the lavenders. So let me just push this to one side. We'll take a paper towel and just wet it, because these snakes that still have their baby skin. And we'll start with, this guy here is a normal. Let's just zoom right in for you. Okay, so we have a normal. You'll notice the dark head, and it's a fairly standard normal pattern. So let's take the normal and add Fire, and you can immediately see that the snake is lighter, much lighter in colour, has a much more reduced pattern, a stronger dorsal stripe. You see the reduced pattern, particularly at the rear of the animal here, where you've got a much reduced pattern. That's fairly typical of Fire. And you're also now starting to get a little bit of a head stamp associated with the fire. So that's a normal and that's a fire. Let's add Pastel. So we add Pastel to the fire, and you can see you've got the same pattern reduction, but now the animal is much brighter, and you see the difference in the head stamp. You can see the influence of Pastel in the yellow colour and the head stamp. So this is Firefly. So we got a normal, we've got fire, we've got Firefly. Now let's add the second dose of Pastel to the Firefly, and we get the Superfly, which is this guy here. And you see again the typical reduction in pattern, but now much paler. And look at the two head stamps side by side. You'll see that the Super Pastel has a much whiter head stamp. So this is Superfly or Super Pastel Fire. So there we've got the progression. Normal, fire. Ooh, these snakes are all over the place. And Firefly. Okay, so you can pick them out immediately. The fire is brighter than the normal. The Firefly is brighter again, very yellow with the same reduced pattern, and the Superfly takes it up a notch further, even paler, different head stamp. So there's the progression. The next two, no fire in these guys. You can see the pattern is completely different to, let's compare it to the fire. You see the pattern is very different. Here is the Firefly. So they stand out immediately as having no fire in them. So these are just Pastel, and you can see that they're a different colour. This one is more orange than this one. So I think this is Pastel here, and this is Super Pastel here. We'll have to wait and see when they shed to see the difference in those two. Okay, so we've got one normal, one fire, one Firefly, one Superfly, one Pastel, one Super Pastel. We've got a bit of everything here. And then we'll take a look at the Lavender. This thing is absolutely gorgeous. Look at the head stamp there, and you see the really bright orange dots along the dorsal. This one is very orange. So let me just get the other Lavender out and we'll talk about this guy for a second. He is in quarantine. He has a problem with his eye. When he came out of the egg, the eye was extremely swollen. You can see it is still clear. It's not gone yellow, but there is a danger of infection here. So this snake has been isolated and has been treated with mild solution of F10 on the tissue, and also a little antimicrobial, animal friendly antimicrobial used just to spray inside the mouth, because you'll see inside the mouth actually the swelling has gone down a little bit now. It is looking better than it was, but there is an issue with this one, but I think it's going to be okay. But let's put them side by side, and I hope the camera is picking this up, but you can see this Lavender is orange and this Lavender is yellow. The head stamp is different. This one has an orange head stamp and this one has a white head stamp. So I think this is just Lavender, no Pastel, no fire, and I think this one is a Pastel Lavender, no fire in this one either. The pattern is also not fire. So we have two Lavenders. This one is improving but does have an issue, and we'll come back to that after it's shed. We'll see whether that's okay, but you can see the difference side by side, the difference in the head stamps. and one of these is clearly much more orange than the other one. This is the non-pastel and this is the pastel. Okay guys, so that's pre-shed. Haven't sexed them yet, and we'll keep our eye on this little guy here. He's far too young to be having any sort of antibiotics, so hopefully once he's shed, that treatment with the little bactericide there will help him out, but we'll keep you posted on this guy. Not all plain sailing. Okay guys, they've all shed out, so let's take a look at them now that they've shed. I haven't changed my opinion on the IDs of most of them, just a little refinement. So let's take a look at them now that they've shed. Okay guys, so clutch 4 has now all shed out, and let's get another look at these guys now that they have shed. I haven't changed my mind a great deal on what these are, just a couple of refinements. So the best way to start IDing your clutch is to start with the parents, what the parents look like, and what the siblings look like alongside each other, because it's very easy to spot differences in the snakes when they're all side by side. And if you remember when we had a look at the clutch before, these two snakes here stand out as having a different pattern. These two guys here, as opposed to the pattern and colour on this one. You can see this is much more reduced, much more yellow, different snake. So side by side you can see that these two guys here are actually, if we look at the head stamps, you can see the head stamps are the same, and I was wondering whether these were just pastel. They're clearly not. Both of these are super pastels. Let's just take a look at what a pastel looks like in comparison to a super pastel. So this guy here is just a pastel. I say just. This guy here is pastel. It's a female, and let's have a look at the head. You can see that the head stamp in comparison, clearly the super pastel version is much more blushed, and also you can see the brightness is quite different. Now the pattern's very similar. So these are both super pastel, and there is a slight difference in colour with these two. One of them is slightly brighter and more yellow than the other. This one is the orangey one, and this one is the yellow one, and that could just be the het influence. If you remember, these are all 66% pos hets, so we have 6 snakes which are non-visual. 2 of those are not going to be carrying the het gene, and 4 of them will. And if I was to be a betting man, putting these snakes side by side, this one is the het and this one isn't. But of course we won't know. Impossible to tell. So those are the 2 pastels, and again on that basis, looking at the brightness of the snakes, the other snake which is not particularly bright is the normal. So that could be our 2 snakes that are not hets. Het for Lavender has a quite strong influence on the brightness of the snake. Het Lavenders tend to be brighter than their non-het counterparts. So that could be the 2 snakes that are not hets. These snakes are all over the place. I put them in a bigger tub just to keep them still, but they're not staying still. So let's run through again with the fire. So if we do the progression again, this guy here is the normal. This guy here is the fire. Let me just zoom in for you, and I think it's quite clear to see the difference. The head stamp, we're getting a slightly brighter head stamp on the fire. Clearly a very, very different pattern and colour on the fire. That's just the single fire gene is brightening up our normal from this to this. This is probably a good time to point out that the fire gene is a really good gene, cheap, accessible, to brighten up your snakes and to keep them bright as they mature. You can see the pattern reduction in the fire, and we've got a much brighter dorsal. We've got the reduced pattern with these, with the donut shape on the dorsal. We'll come back to that in a moment. You can see particularly at the rear of the snake, the reduced pattern here. See at the back there, at the back of the snake, the pattern is much reduced compared to our normal. So this is a normal, a fire, add a dose of Pastel, and Pastel works really well with fire. You can see we have the same reduced pattern, a nice blushed head stamp. So this is Firefly. You can see that Pastel does put back a slightly busier pattern into the snake, but you can still see the influence of fire. And then we add another dose of Pastel and get the Super Fire. So this is the Super Fire. You can see the much brighter colour, but again you can see the donuts on the dorsal. So this is the Super Fire. Firefly and Super Fire. This is one of the Lavenders. These snakes are absolutely squirrely at the moment, and at first I thought that this was just a Lavender. Fire doesn't normally have the head stamp, the orange head stamp, but you see along the dorsal here these orange dots along the dorsal, and these are actually the same donuts that we saw in the fire example, where the snake here is white, the normal snake is black. So these are actually the same donuts. Let's just compare the two. So here is the fire, and you see this donut here on the dorsal with like a bow tie. That's exactly the same pattern that we see on this guy here. So this one is just fire, and I believe that this Lavender is actually a fire Lavender. So that has changed after the shed, because these orange dots have come out really bright. So I think we've got a fire Lavender here, and that's next to the fire there. This is an adult fire. This female is due to lay in a week or so, so I don't want to stress her out too much, but you can see how well she's kept her colour and pattern. And here is exactly the same snake as a junior, and you can see exactly the same features. You see the stripe down the tail, the stripe down the tail, the reduced pattern down the sides here, reduced pattern down the sides on this guy, particularly on this side here is the same as this here, and the head stamp also very similar head stamp to the fire. So this is an example of what fire does to snakes that contain that gene. They stay bright and they stay high contrast even as they get older. So that's fire. Dad is Firefly. He is also het Lavender. Typically he's deep in shed, but again you can see the donuts on the dorsal with the bow ties on each side, and normally he would be very bright. I think even in shed you can see that he is still very bright. So let's compare Dad to the Firefly that we got in the clutch. So here is father and son, and immediately you can see that they are the exact same snake. The pattern is fire all day long. Father has got a little bit more muted in colour, but he is in shed. He's normally very bright. So this little guy here, a chip off the old block. So this is Firefly het Lavender, father in shed, and this is Firefly in the offspring. and just for comparison let's put the Superfly. So there is Firefly and Superfly next to the Firefly father. These are extremely bright. Very pleased with these guys. Let's just quickly sex this Superfly. And that's a male. So he could potentially be replacing Dad. What about the Firefly? Let's see what this one is. That's also a male. So 2 males there, Firefly and Superfly. Let me just quickly sex the Lavender. That's also a male. See the hemipens. Damn, male heavy on this clutch. And I will show this guy. This is the other Lavender, the one with the eye problem, and he has shed out, but you can see that he is still extremely swollen around the eye. The odd thing is that the eye has remained clear. There's no pus, there's nothing. The inside of the mouth is very clean. He is being treated with a bacteria. I keep calling him he. Let's just quickly sex this guy. This one is female. So she is being treated and hopefully will recover. There doesn't seem to be much infection. It's almost like there's just too much fluid around the eye. Very badly swollen, but still quite clear. And now that they've shed, you can see the difference in the colour. The head stamps are very different. One has an orange head stamp, one doesn't. So this one, you can also see on this the pattern reduction on the flanks, which tells me that this is fire. And this one is not. This one's just pastel. That's yellowy colour. So we've got a pastel Lavender with a very swollen eye, and we have a fire Lavender. This one is male, this one is female. So we'll have to monitor this one very, very carefully. She is being treated every day with a bactericide. I can see right into her eye. It's clear, it's just fluid on the eye. Very, very swollen. So we'll monitor her carefully, but those are the 2 Lavenders that we got. Okay guys, that's it for clutch number 4. They're all set up now in their individual tubs, and we'll be offering them their first meal in the next couple of days. We'll see whether these ones actually eat. If you remember, clutch 2 was a difficult clutch for me, so we'll see whether these guys are more willing to eat. They are actually extremely active in their tubs now that they've been set up, so it's looking good. We'll keep our eye on the snake with the eye infection. Unfortunately, that's the female of the 2 Lavenders. The fire Lavender is the male, and the pastel Lavender is the female, and she is the one with the eye infection. And obviously she is the most valuable snake to hold back from my collection. So we'll be watching that one. I'll give you an update on that as we go along. My pastel Enchi clown is due to lay in the next few days, and we still have the cherry bomb clutch to come. I've got 5 clutches in the incubator, and the end of September we'll have 3 clutches hatching from there, so plenty more to come. Don't forget to share, like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.